Welcome to Essential Ingredients, powered by NextGen Purpose. EI serves up thoughtful conversations with industry leaders and pioneers who support a regenerative future for our food system. The stories shared by our guests are meant to spark curiosity and inspire informed global change. So welcome to Essential Ingredients. I'm your host, Justine Reichman. With me today is Dr. Zack Abbott. He is the CEO and founder of ZBiotics. Welcome, Zack.
Hey, Justine. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
It's great to chat with you too. I'm excited to learn more about ZBiotics and how you got into this and talk all things microbiome and, all things that are really interesting around this topic. And it's a relatively new space, so I think there's a lot to learn for everyone.
Absolutely, yeah.
So before we get started and go dig deep, I'd love for you to just share what ZBiotics is.
Yeah, absolutely. So ZBiotics, we at ZBiotics, the company, we make genetically engineered probiotics, and then we take those probiotics and put them into products that we make and then sell. So essentially we start with a probiotic bacteria, so like a good, safe, edible bacteria, and then we engineer it so that it performs some sort of useful function, very specific function for you. The idea with our first product is that it's a probiotic bacteria that we've engineered to be able to break down one of the metabolic byproducts of alcohol called acetaldehyde that makes you feel not so great the day after drinking. So when you drink alcohol, this acetaldehyde some of this acetaldehyde starts to form in the gut. And so our bacteria is now specifically engineered to break down that acetaldehyde so that you can feel better the next day. That's our first product, but lots more on the way. It's a really exciting technology. And so that's what we do.
Okay. So before we dig too deep into this, I heard you mention the word alpha-hydroxy. I can't even say it. It's a tongue twister.
Yeah. Acetaldehyde, right?
Acetaldehyde.
Yep.
Great. And I've heard you mention it. And I would just like for those listening and watching so that they can be part of this conversation, better understand what is I'm sorry, huh?
Acetaldehyde, yeah.
Acetaldehyde.
Yeah.
So if you could just talk to us a little bit about that would be great.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's an interesting molecule. It's so essentially when you drink, the star molecule is of course like ethanol or alcohol, right? And when you drink alcohol, the ethanol gets absorbed into your bloodstream. Most of the ethanol gets absorbed in your bloodstream. It circulates throughout your body. It has these, it's a molecule, and that molecule has certain effects on your body that are, usually, why you're drinking. And then your liver breaks down alcohol, it breaks down the ethanol in two steps. It uses one enzyme to convert alcohol or ethanol into acetaldehyde. And then a second enzyme converts acetaldehyde into acetate. And acetate is essentially vinegar. It's innocuous. And at that point, sort of the story of like the toxicity of alcohol is over. Other things happen after that, but not interesting for this conversation.
I appreciate you breaking that down because it's complicated. I didn't, and I want to make sure that everybody understands what we're talking about as we go deeper into this conversation. I feel like it's a bit sciencey.
It is a little bit.
So we're going to have a little science, a little personal, a little business, and then wrap them all together.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. So the kind of key for ZBiotics was really focusing on that intermediate, that acetaldehyde in the middle. And acetaldehyde is this molecule very similar to ethanol. It's just only a little bit different. But that difference is very important chemically. And it's a highly reactive molecule, meaning that molecule can like bind to proteins and DNA and all these things in your body that can really like gum up the system. And so it sort of like can wreak havoc in your body. And the good news is that intermediate acetaldehyde is very short-lived in the liver. The liver is very good at converting the alcohol to acetaldehyde and then subsequently immediately to acetate, which is not toxic. And so it's sort of like this toxic intermediate, but it doesn't really form in large quantities in the liver. The story in the gut is a bit different. So a very small amount of the alcohol you drink, most of it's absorbed and is processed by the liver, but a small amount is broken down in the gut. And that alcohol gets converted to acetaldehyde using very similar enzymes as your liver in the gut, in large part by your microbiome, by the microbes that are living in your gut, because microbes, bacteria, they don't like alcohol, and so they want to get rid of it, and so they convert it to acetaldehyde, but they don't subsequently convert the acetaldehyde to acetate. And so what happens is you get this acetaldehyde accumulation in the gut, and then that acetaldehyde gets absorbed into the bloodstream out of the gut, sort of wreaks havoc throughout the body, and then makes its way to the liver, and then the liver can very effectively break it down. And so even though the gut is a very minor source of alcohol metabolism, it ends up being the major source of acetaldehyde. And so this really nasty molecule is sort of like formed in the gut. And normally you kind of have to wait for it to make its way to the liver to break it down. And so at ZBiotics, we thought we could engineer a microbe that could pass through your gut to deal with this problem kind of before it gets into the bloodstream and kind of wreaks havoc throughout the body. So we just basically took the same process that your liver already does, the same enzyme, and we just programmed a safe bacteria you can eat to make that enzyme in your gut where the acetaldehyde is forming. So that's kind of, that's the science. It's a little, I don't know if that was maybe too
all good. It's all
too
good.
sciencey.
It's good, and we'll get into it a little deeper so that the
Cool.
rest of us that are not sciencey can really understand the impact of this and understand what your objectives were, and first and foremost, what inspired it.
Yeah. Well, I think that the thing that inspired this overall, ZBiotics as a whole, was the idea that there are so many important functions that we could essentially execute. We have all these bacteria that we're engaging with all the time, and currently, right now, like if you think about probiotics, they're just bacteria that we sort of take out of the ground and like hope that they have some sort of helpful benefit for you. But it's very variable, right? Like everybody's microbiome is totally different. And so we have this huge community. So it's sort of like some interesting, I guess. So sorry, I know it's a long and circuitous way to kind of get back to your question, but I promise.
Well, I was wondering if we moved on from my question. No, just kidding.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. So I like understanding the microbiome then will help kind of like understand like what inspired me to produce and what's so exciting about ZBiotics. So
don't feel bad here. Like you don't have to apologize. It's all good. Because what's interesting is that we're all inspired by different things, right? Yeah. And sometimes mine was watching a movie one day, some ridiculous rom-com. That inspired me to create something that connects people. I'm not sure how I made that connection.
Right. But
they all come from different places. And the goal here is to give you a platform to share your story so that you can inspire others too. And sharing the circuitous route that it took for you to get from inspiration to product.
Right.
It's going to resonate and really inspire others, because you're not the first person to leap from, take from one to go to another that's completely not related when you look at it on paper, but somehow connects in our brains.
Right.
Makes complete sense.
Yeah.
So tell me, because I'm interested.
Okay. Well, yeah. So, I guess, so I was, I did my PhD in microbiology, and I, learned a lot about, and first I was sort of interested in microbes because they cause disease. Like I was interested in sort of disease and disease prevention. But then as I learned more and I got to know more about it, I learned about all of these incredible microbes. Like the vast majority of the bacteria we interact with are either neutral or beneficial, not disease causing. And that became really exciting to me. And so, you have this microbiome, you have as many bacterial cells as you do human cells in and on your body, which is pretty amazing. When you think about it, like numerically speaking, you're just as much bacterial ecosystem as you are a human body. And so that was really interesting to me. And everybody's microbiome is different. So the community of microbes that live in your gut is totally different than the one that lives in mine. And your microbiome today is different than it will be in a week or a month. So it's constantly changing. And these community of microbes, so unlike your cells, which all have the same DNA, all these microbes are totally different, right? And so they live in this like complex community, much like a city or a country, and they interact with each other, and they have this complex network of interactions. And so when I was thinking about probiotics generally, they, currently it's sort of like the vast majority of probiotics are lactobacillus or bifidobacteria. These are like common probiotic bacteria that aren't even really found in a healthy adult microbiome. And the idea that they could sort of like silver bullet be beneficial regardless of your microbial community is not a good scientific kind of hypothesis. It's not really backed very well with science. At best, you could say that some probiotics can help some people sometimes, which is what you would expect given the fact that everybody's microbiome is so different. So I thought I was inspired by the idea that we could do better, that we could take a probiotic and then we could engineer it to do something specific, and that specific function would be valuable independent. So the probiotic just becomes a chassis for kind of like a function. And so that was the idea. I was taking genetic engineering, modern biotechnology, and refining this sort of like the analogy would be like, these bacteria are just kind of exist in nature and we kind of give them to you and hope that they do something for you. It's sort of like we pull like a hunk of iron ore out of the ground and we hand it to you and say, hey, like this will do whatever you want it to do, whatever you want iron to do. If you want it to be a hammer or a screwdriver, it can do any of these things. And obviously that's not true, but we can take that iron ore and we can refine it down into the shape of a hammer and say like, this is a very specific tool for hammering nails. And that's what this does. And so like, that's essentially what we've done with ZBiotics is we've taken genetic engineering and we've refined a probiotic bacteria so that it can perform a very specific and useful function, regardless and agnostic of your microbiome. And I thought that was a very exciting idea because at that point, we can take any biological function on the planet, anything that any biology does, and then we can program that into a probiotic, and then you can eat that probiotic and then temporarily gain that new biological function as the bacteria passes through you. That to me was like, it just blew my mind.
I gotta ask, were you dreaming this up at 2 years old or 3 years old? Like, I want to do this. I want to go get my PhD in this, and this is what really I get excited about. Or was there something else that spearheaded that interest or led you down that path?
I love that. It's a very insightful question because you're right. Obviously, I wasn't born with this. No, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I certainly didn't even know I wanted to be a microbiologist or anything. It's sort of circuitous route. And but I think that the aha moment for me that like set me on this path towards what would become ZBiotics was I was very interested in microbes and bacteria and viruses, like I say, largely from a disease perspective initially. And so I was working at an HIV lab before doing my PhD, and this lunchtime speaker came, and he was talking about his HIV research, and he had engineered this protein so basically he had taken a microbe to produce a very specific protein, and this protein could bind to the HIV virus and completely prevent the virus from infecting a cell. And I was like totally blown away. This was amazing. I'm like, oh my gosh, like you've done it, you've solved HIV. And he like laughed. He was like, I went up to him after and I was like, so, are you going to make this into a drug and are you going to, and you're going to give it to everybody? And he was like, no, like, absolutely not. This is a protein. Proteins are these like very complex and difficult things to make. I was only invented this as a research tool. It would be wildly impractical for us to manufacture all of this protein. And then we'd have to, inject it into people because proteins are unstable, and you have to do that every day of your life to prevent you from getting HIV. It doesn't make sense. It was meant as a tool. And so I walked away from that thinking like, wow, that's really stupid. That like, he's basically saying that like logistics are the reason why we can't have like proteins be like, delivered functionally. And so I thought like, what if, we were able to make protein or enzyme delivery more easy? And, that led me to think about the idea of the fact that we have all these bacteria in our gut constantly making all of these functional proteins for us. Like, what if we engineered them to make a protein that was, that we wanted, that was useful? And so that was it took me a long time. I started ZBiotics about 10 years after I heard that lunchtime talk. But that I think was kind of like the moment for me when I was like this is a problem that we could solve and we could do something really big with it. And it took a long time to get there. And then of course I got to ZBiotics and obviously it's not HIV, but it is like a proof of concept for functional protein delivery from a safe probiotic bacteria, which is a really exciting thing.
So my question to you is, microbiologist, doctor of microbiology, entrepreneur, how did you get, obviously you wanted to fix the problem, and I hear you say that and I get that. Did you see yourself fixing it scientifically, to, through research and all these kinds of things to provide as a tool to somebody else. Obviously not, you built a company, but talk to me about that road from microbiologist to entrepreneur, and where was your head at? I mean, was that the plan?
No, it definitely wasn't. I not on my radar at all to be an entrepreneur. I didn't even consider it. I'd had this idea, and I thought of myself sort of, I even as a kid, I was always like really obsessed with inventors and invention. I used to I idolized like Thomas Edison and all of his inventions. And I thought that was a really, that for me combined a lot of passions. It was like problem solving, it was creativity, it was building something that had never been built before. And so that was what I kind of thought of initially, was the idea that I could maybe invent this. And then as I kind of dug into it more, I saw that like the best way to do that is to start a company, right? Like there's not really an opportunity for you to go to work somebody else and then build whatever you want. Like you can go work for somebody else and they'll tell you what to build, but you don't really always get to kind of solve the problems you want to solve. And so this idea, I just couldn't get rid of it. It kept like stirring around in my head, and I realized that the only way I was ever going to get the opportunity to build it the way I wanted was if I started a company for myself, and I built it, and I created the opportunity for myself as opposed to going to work for somebody else. And I think that was why entrepreneurship sort of fell into my lap. I hadn't intended to. The story was I had some friends that I was working with at another job leave to start their own company. And they were like, hey, you should start one too with the idea you told us about. And I was like, what are you talking about? I wouldn't even know where to begin. And they sort of were like, they gave me some early tips and then kind of like twisted my arm to apply to for a little bit of funding, and I managed to get it. And then it was sort of like off to the races without ever even really intending to. I sort of felt like I fell into it, or I got kind of forced into it. But
that really connects with the question I was going to ask, because as a microbiologist, you're a researcher, right?
Right.
And that's what you were focused on. That's what your core competency was in. And to say, okay, well, I'm going to go create this business. Takes another set of skills. Not to say you don't have them,
right?
Or I don't have them.
Well, I didn't. Yeah.
Right, and that's the point. So
yeah.
When you decided to go start this business, and that your core competencies are in research and all things microbiology or biome, what were your next steps? I mean, I know your friends gave you some tips and tools, but how are you feeling then? Was that must have been a little frightening or scary, or what do you do first?
Yeah, it was, and it is, and it's overwhelming. And then I think that I sort of just naturally kind of fell into starting with what I knew, and figured, I'll figure out the rest later. Let's just see if this has legs. And so what I knew, of course, as you said, is the science. And so I thought, like, okay, look, if I can build something that I believe works, if I can do the science, then we can build a business around that. Because I believed strongly that, like, if we built this thing, that it would be really, really valuable. And so when I started ZBiotics, I didn't even really know exactly what I was going to build. Like the first pitches I had were around a probiotic to help your gut recover from exposure to radiation. Was like an example of something I thought of. Like, it was, which was a very cool idea, and I had this like biology, around it or whatever, but it was objectively not a good business idea. Like nobody was interested in that. And so it took some ideating and talking to a lot of people to realize that what I wanted to do was make something. Well, I had a list of things that I knew I wanted with this tech. And one was that I wanted it to be accessible. I think that there's like another layer that I probably need to bring into the story to kind of explain a little bit more as to why I chose to go the direction I did, which is that, like, in addition to this very exciting technology that I thought could do a lot of good, I also simultaneously was, as a scientist, very frustrated by the direction in which the conversation around GMOs was going. There was a lot of things that were really unfortunate and negative that had happened with the use of the technology of genetic engineering, and that would result in a lot of public mistrust, and that's very understandable. What I think the conversation really got out of control was when brands that had nothing to do with genetic engineering whatsoever started throwing that technology under the bus because they realized people were afraid of it. And they thought that they could make their brand stand out if they said that we're non-GMO, even though they had nothing to do with genetic engineering. And so, like, for instance, if you walk into a grocery store, you'll see like there's lots of wheat flour that's labeled like non-GMO. but there is no genetically engineered wheat. It doesn't exist. So all GMO flour is non-GMO. All wheat flour is non-GMO. And so that was really a situation where the technology was getting thrown under the bus so that brands could make a buck. And like that really frustrated me, because at the end of the day, the technology, I feel, is very, or I felt then and still feel now, is very powerful and extremely important for humanity in terms of addressing a lot of sort of the existential crises we're facing around like feeding a growing population of people, dealing with emerging diseases, climate change. These things are all like partnering with biology and using biotechnology are very like, this is a very important way for us to accomplish that. But yeah.
Yeah, no. So my question for you is using the biology and the science, because I think right now we're at a crucial point where there's a lack of science and efficacy for a lot of these products that are acting to promote health, if you will,
yeah,
in the space, right? Whether it's functional food, whether it's, people are using the term food as medicine, etc.
Right.
So when you, as a researcher and as a biologist, came up with this idea and you started to use it or test it, did you do any trials with people? What was your process to validate the idea?
Yeah, I think, the idea there was, that we could use, like, as I say, use biotechnology to make a product that actually did something, right? I think that was really important, and that we could build something that people could use in their daily lives and choose, as opposed to have to have. And so I didn't want to build drugs. I wanted to build products that people could choose. And so with that in mind, I wanted to build something that, wasn't curing a disease. It was for healthy people. But to your point, that actually improved their health in some way. And so that's sort of a fine line, right? Because if you make health claims or you cure a disease, then you're a drug by the FDA standards. Right. And so, and I definitively did not want to make drugs because there's a lot of reasons why I didn't want to make drugs, but like one of them being that like it's incredibly expensive, and it's not really conducive for the inventor. Like you're essentially, your goal is to scrape together enough data to get acquired by one of the big drug companies, and then you kind of have to let it go. Right. So you want to bring it to my. Yeah.
I wasn't trying to go the drug route. I was more trying to say, as a scientist, what did you do to show the impact?
Right. Yeah.
And the direction, and the, what could be from taking ZBiotics, let's say somebody has had alcohol, then they use this. Did you test a variety of people? Did you put a sample together? Because as a scientist, I'm looking at you going, he's got to have done something like this. Well, you made it happen and you can see it in whatever format you have. I'm sure that there's also some experience that you want, or some trial or something that you wanted to create to be able to substantiate what you were doing and share experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, that's exactly right. And the whole foundation of ZBiotics is around the idea that we could build something that actually creates a benefit and we can test that, as opposed to, as you were saying, a lot of the things out there that are sort of like just kind of white labeled, swept off the shelf vitamins and stuff that say like, hey, this will help you in some way. So
when you say you tested, how are you testing it?
Yeah, right. So we so it's several things. So, very systematic, right? We built the product and the goal of it was to break down acetaldehyde. So the first thing that we did was validate that it could break down acetaldehyde, and it could do so at a physiologically relevant rate, meaning like it could break down the amount of acetaldehyde that a person would be likely to be exposed to after drinking, right? Like, so that it could break down enough to make a difference. And so we know roughly how much acetaldehyde forms in the gut, depending on how much you drink. And so we wanted to make sure that like a reasonable dose of bacteria could break down that amount of acetaldehyde. So we validated that in a test tube.
And how did you validate it though?
Yeah, validated that in a test tube. So we basically
in a test tube. Okay, got it.
First, I'm walking you through it. Like, so we would, test to say that like we would add a known amount of acetaldehyde and known amount of bacteria, and make sure that it could break it down in a reasonable period of time. And so first we showed the bacteria were capable of doing that. So then the question becomes, okay, can they do that in your body? And even if they do break down the acetaldehyde in your gut, like, does that actually result in you feeling better the next day, right? Like, there's a lot of sort of like questions that happen there. And so essentially what we did was we validated that final point, right? That like, it didn't really matter if it broke down the acetaldehyde in your gut if it didn't result in you feeling better. So what we wanted to find out was the endpoint was, do people feel better? And so we did several tests to validate whether or not we created that benefit. And so I could say I can't really talk about some of them in detail because they're not review like FDA approved clinical trials. And so it would be sort of like misleading for me to discuss them because like I can't market that. But what I can say is that like, I think the thing I can share is that we also like did perception of efficacy. So we asked people to try the product and then tell us the next day whether they felt better than expected, the same as expected, or worse than expected the next day. So we did several tests, but this was, I think, was an interesting one. And we saw that in that scenario.
How large was the pool of people?
So we started with first we did like 20 people. We saw like 95% of people said they felt better than expected. Then we expanded it out to like 90 people and saw the same. It was like 94 and 95%. And then we went out to like 220 people, and still the same. And then now we've been on the market for 3.5 years. We have sort of customer satisfaction as well as continued surveying of people and asking them how they're doing. And now that we have hundreds or tens of thousands of people, the numbers are still very similar. It's a 92 to 95% customer satisfaction and evaluation of feeling better than expected. So you basically ask yourself, do you think that it's hard to know, right? To A/B test whether or not how you would have felt had you not take the product, but people usually have a good feeling for like whether or not they should feel worse. And I think ultimately that's what we wanted to create, was something where people recognize the product helping them feel better. That's the endpoint that really matters, right? And so we know biochemically we're breaking down acetaldehyde. And so then what really matters is, does that translate into a benefit for the end user? And that's what we wanted to create, was something where people really perceived and felt the benefit of a genetically engineered probiotic. Given that our product is the world's first and still the only genetically engineered probiotic on the market for anything, like it was very important that people could feel that benefit. And so we've seen like very definitively in now larger and larger populations of people that indeed we're creating that benefit for people. And so that's very satisfying to see.
I bet. And, I know you have, ZBiotic, and I'm curious how many products do you have, or are you planning to have going forward?
Yeah, I mean, the vision of the company is like a whole like suite of, right now we have the ones on the market. But we're looking to commercialize our second product, really exciting second product, starting in the first quarter of next year. And so we're in the process of commercializing now. I can't talk about specifics just yet, but we're in the process of validating it and dealing with all the sort of packaging regulations and all those sorts of things. It's totally different than our first product. It has nothing to do with alcohol. It's more around your microbiome and gut health. But again, it's an engineered probiotic to do a very specific function. And then we're looking at things related to sleep and exercise and recovery and nutrient acquisition and protection from like heavy metals and other toxins that you're kind of engaging with in your daily life. So the whole goal here is to engineer products, do something very specific to make healthy people healthier. The goal of these products is for people to choose them when they're already looking to make healthy choices in their life. And so I think there's a million products we can build. And I hope that in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to have a whole shelf in the grocery store of all the different.
I hope so too. And I can't wait to try them myself.
Yeah.
That would be fun. We're going wine tasting tomorrow, so that would have been useful.
Perfect,
I know, right?
Perfect time to give it a try.
Can you get it to me ASAP? On that note, if somebody wanted to go get the product, where would they go get it?
Right now, best place to get it is our website. So ZBiotics.com is the best place to kind of get the product. Yeah.
Awesome. And so, just what's new and what's next? I know you got your product coming up in 2024, but any other plans in the imminent future?
Yeah, I mean, we're excited about what we can do with this tech, and we have a whole pipeline of products that we're building, and I think that the other arm of ZBiotics, in addition to these exciting products, is what we're doing in terms of GMO advocacy and genetic engineering and GEM. So GEM is genetically engineered microbe safety, so gem safety. So the idea that we can build products and establish clear, defined, rational, science-based regulations around how do we make them and how do we make them safe. I think that like there's a lot of exciting things we can do, but like regulations are unclear, and we're still the only product in the market that does this. And so we're hoping that we can build really rational, exciting, good, clean regulations so that this category can grow and there could be a lot of trust and a lot of safety in it. And I think that that's a huge part of what we're focused on right now.
I think that I really appreciate you sharing that. It was great to have you on the podcast. I'm excited for people to, check out your website, and if they did want to get product, if you could just share what your website is, spell it out for everyone.
Oh, sure.
Who's listening to the podcast can jot it down.
Cool. Yeah. So it's ZBiotics. That's ZBiotics.com.
Awesome. Well, it was great to connect with you. Great to learn all about ZBiotics. Clearly, I did not order it in time for my wine tasting tomorrow. We'll have to sort that out.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, keep us posted on how things progress. We'd love to stay in touch and hear more about this. And for our audience, if you guys have any specific questions, because this was very sciencey, do shoot us a note. We'll see if we can connect you guys so that we can continue this conversation and make sure that we've made the information accessible to everybody. So
absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks so much. It was great chatting with you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
To learn more about these episodes and access show notes, go to nextgenpurpose.com and choose podcast. If you like this episode, head to Apple Podcasts or your favorite platform to subscribe and leave us a review. Visit the Next Gen Purpose YouTube channel to subscribe to our EI videocast and give this episode a like while you're there. Follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Next Gen Purpose, and connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram at Justine_Reichman. Thanks for joining us.